screen, and I'm a member of the Food for Thought Network, and also a lecturer in applied linguistics at the University of Melbourne. Now, I'd like to begin our session tonight by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land where we work and live, the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nations, and pay my respects to elders past, present, and emerging. So today marks event number 6, and the topic we'll be dealing with and delving into is the reciprocal interplay between men and women and their shared influence in establishing attitudes of equality or sexism. Now, I'd like to take this opportunity to introduce our guest speaker, Konstantinos Kalymnios. He's a community-minded individual. He's a lawyer, a well-known columnist, poet, short story writer, and commentator of all things Greek, including language, religion, history, politics, and many more topics that he will probably touch upon today. He was also awarded a Government of Victoria Award for excellence in multicultural affairs by the Governor of Victoria. And now I'd like to move on to introducing our host, Varvara Ioannou, who I've had the pleasure to meet last year when I came to know of the Food for Thought Network. As most of you may know, Food for Thought is an inclusive, not-for-profit Greek-Australian women's network. And what it does is that, sorry, could we, thanks. And what it does is promote awareness, particularly about the barriers and enablers for women's development, above all inspiring positive change, both in individuals, but also the community in general. Now, we've been organising such inspirational events and providing opportunities for networking and using really the power of stories to inspire this notion of positive change, both in individuals and organisations. Now, this year is really special because we're commemorating 20 years since the establishment of the Food for Thought Network. And Varvara Ioannou, as an inspirational figure, embodies the network's philosophy, as she is truly a voice for women. And this is something which her forthcoming book, Her Voice, which is entitled Her Voice, Greek, Australian Women and Friends, this is something that the book really advocates. So I'd like to now hand over to Varvara, who can commence the
I think you're competing with your little one there, Maria. Thank you for that lovely introduction. And welcome, everyone. And welcome, Costa, to the network.
Thank you very much.
Well, let's begin. I have known Costa since he was a little boy, but we never connected or had a conversation. And I started following him when he started writing for Neos Cosmos in his Diatrivi. But I've been following him for a while, and I've been meeting him at various community events. And then I interviewed his mum for the book last year. And I heard a little bit more about Konstantinos, and I've been taking a keen interest. He's someone that I've admired all along. I don't know of anybody his age that grew up in Australia to be able to speak and write in English and Greek to the degree that he does. I have to look up a dictionary, Costa, to understand what you're on about. I don't know how you get those linguistic skills. Anyway, I'll stop here and get you to say hello and provide the context how all of this conversation that we're going to have tonight has changed from when we start talking. Welcome.
Yeah, thank you very much, Varvara, and thank you to everyone else for having me and being here tonight. First, I'd like to say one thing. You mentioned how we met and when I knew you even before I met you. And the reason why is because I grew up reading the books which you authored, the multicultural books which you authored for the Victorian and the South Australian state governments back in the day where state governments actually cared about multiculturalism, and they sponsored the authoring of books in multicultural languages. And you were one of the main people that wrote books in Greek for Greek kids growing up in that period. And I grew up reading those books. And some of those books were amazing. They were very professionally done. They were illustrated by people who today are major children's writers and illustrators like Lee Hobbs. There's one, Pigueno στο Teatro, which Lee Hobbs has illustrated, and he was amazed because he had forgotten when I raised it with him. And this is a great achievement. And my point is this: you do something, you forget about it, but it changes people's lives. And these books touched me. And you mentioned before about my interest in the Greek language. Well, you were a major part of that, not knowing me back then, growing up in the 80s. So thank you very much.
I'm moved by that. That was a long time ago. And still, when I meet people in the community, they talk about those books. They were the times, the 80s were the times for multiculturalism and languages. And we'll get into that a little bit later. Konstantinos, when we start discussing things in our network, we like to get to the personal first, trying to understand the speaker at the personal level, because you write about a lot of things and language is one of those, and you talked about the influence. Where did you grow up? Tell us a little bit.
I grew up here in Melbourne. I grew up in the city of Moonee Valley, so Essendon, Moonee Ponds, these areas. A very old Greek community there. The first people came from the 30s. My father came here in 1954 as a 4-year-old child. My mum came when she was 12, settled in Flemington, which was, a little bit further down, next suburb. So I have this very strong local connection and this very strong affinity with the suburb and with the Greek community in the area which I grew up. And I've really got no choice because it was mostly people from my dad's village and from my mum's village who settled in those areas. So we formed a small micro community of our own. And I think that informs my understanding of community itself and fosters a sense of belonging.
So Costa, you grew up in a family, your mum and your dad, right, was sort of born, well, your dad was more Australian, I would say. Mum came here at the age of 12, and you grew up with also a grandmother. Talk us a little bit about those influences of your mum and grandma.
Yeah, easy. The first thing that I have to say, as compared to a lot of people of my generation, I didn't have to negotiate the coming into this country and generation gap thing that a lot of people did. Most of my friends growing up, their parents didn't speak English. My friends were their window to the world. Because my parents grew up here, were educated here, they fought those battles for me. That had already been done and negotiated by the time I came on the scene. So my parents were my window on the world, onto the Australian world, rather than the other way around. And I think that makes a big difference in outlook. It also makes a big difference with regard to communication. Now, in my family, everyone generally spoke Greek as a general rule, and we still do in the home. But because my parents functioned in the Australian environment, my father's an electronic engineer, my mum was a principal of a primary school, it was a different relationship. And that generation gap that we talk about between first and second generation Greeks in Australia didn't exist with us. We basically communicated from the beginning on the same plane. And I think that makes a difference in relation to the way values are transferred, the conversations you have, and also the identity negotiation that takes place within the family.
That's fabulous. So you really grew up in a household, an educated household. And as you said, you were sort of, you didn't have to fight those battles. So that's really a privileged position to be in. What about, tell us a little bit about the influence of the grandma, because you've been writing about her. I recall an article about your grandma. What influence did you have? What do you remember from her?
There's two grandmothers that I grew up with. The first is my paternal grandmother in Essendon, and the second is my maternal great-grandmother, so my mother's grandmother. And I would start with my paternal grandmother first, because she's the person that looked after me when I was very young, and up until the age of 20 when she died was very instrumental in my upbringing and in my character. And she was, Samos is a weird place. My dad comes from Samos because Samos is more matriarchal than patriarchal in some respects. There's this tacit belief that apart from the firstborn who inherits the family, most of the family property and lives in the patriarchal home, the other younger sons go off and stay with their petherica. So the power balance is different if you're a younger son. And my grandfather was a middle child. He wasn't the oldest. So my grandmother had a very large say in what was going on in the family. I think she was the dominant person within the family. And my grandmother was a very interesting woman for her time, because she believed that men should function on the same level as women, and that women are the ones that need to be listened to. And that was drummed into me indirectly at a very early age. She called the shots, we listened to her. And she would come up with interesting things like, well, other grandparents, my friends' grandparents, would indulge the grandchildren. They would go there, they would give them money, they would give them sweets, sit them in front of the television. My grandmother would constantly be talking to me. She was an amazing reciter of poetry. That would happen all day. She would be telling me stories about what happened in the village. Then she would have me out in the garden when I wanted to watch Sesame Street. She would pull me out in the garden to learn how to do gardening. And then we'd be in the kitchen, she'd be teaching me how to cook. And while she'd be teaching me how to cook, she would be telling me advice like, ο άντρας πρέπει να ξέρει όλες τις δουλειές του σπιτιού. Και ο πατέρας σου ήξερε όλες τις δουλειές. My grandmother got my father learning how to cook, how to do all the housework, repairs, you name it, which was not the traditional way for Greek Australian migrants. The stories I hear is of men being in a privileged position, women waiting on them. That didn't happen in my grandmother's family. Everyone had to pull their weight. And I remember once as a young child saying to my grandmother, μπορώ να έχω λίγο νερό, μπορείς να μου φέρεις νερό? And my grandmother said, you will never, ever ask me for water ever again. If you want water, you will go and get it yourself. And if I ask you for water, you will go and get it for me. But you don't ask me to bring water for you. And I found that interesting.
What an amazing woman. And what about the grandmother, the Pirotissa grandmother?
Η γιαγιά η Πανάγιο left this earth at 105. And she had a very long life and a very tragic life. She lost her parents at a very young age. She remembered, she was born an Ottoman citizen and remembered the liberation of Yanina. So she was a witness to that. She grew up in poverty. She lost her husband. She lost 2 children. She lost a grandson, and she lost her house twice during the wars and things that followed. And she was a very philosophical, very stoic woman, and a very, if I can say, dignified woman. And through her experiences growing up and negotiating what is a very patriarchal society in Epiro, as you would know, Varvara, she formed the opinion that men are generally irresponsible and weak and need to be not taken too seriously, and leave the woman to get on with all of the work. So the understanding I had growing up, I formed this opinion later, because as a young child, you don't grasp all of the nuances. And also I became close to her after my paternal grandmother died. She didn't have a very high opinion of men and their competence. And that was informed by what she'd seen in her village, her own experiences, and the fact that she was basically left alone to bring up 4 children and grandkids in dire poverty. She was a very remarkable woman. She believed in the importance of education, even though she was completely uneducated. She came to Australia so my mother could be educated, because she knew that that couldn't happen in the village. So she was far-seeing. And she would tell me interesting things which at the time I couldn't understand, like "Ποτέ να μην κοροϊδέψεις γυναίκα," which I thought meant what, making fun of someone? Why can't I make fun of someone? But I know what she was talking about now. Yeah. "Ποτέ να μην ταλαιπωρήσεις γυναίκα." There were all these things, and she would say them. And these kind of behaviors would be drummed into you, that there are certain ways of acting, certain ways of considering people. And if she saw that you were not following those, she was very quick to pull you up on them. And she was a very quiet woman, but she was possessed of immense dignity, and she was a person that you instinctively listened to, whether you liked it or not.
Now I understand those influences on you, Konstantinos, and you often write about the unsung heroes. And you say, how do you choose? You know, why do you choose this woman? Or why do you choose that person? Well, how do we measure success? But we'll come that a little bit later. I want to go slowly. Did you always want to be a lawyer? Because you don't write about legal measures.
Who would read that? It's so boring. Everyone hates lawyers. What did Shakespeare say? Shakespeare said, first, kill all the lawyers. So I need to find a way to redeem myself for society somehow. So I pretend to be interested in culture.
Yes. I have another friend in Adelaide. He studied, you know, a doctor, and then he discovered really his passion is not to be a doctor, but it's to music and poetry and writing. So when did you discover that you are more leaning towards, you know, poetry, history, and all other cultural things and community things?
I am a product of my upbringing. My mother loved poetry. My mother loved literature. And back in the village, when you're poor and you don't have the financial ability back in the day to study further, you're limited in what you can read. So basically, when my mother came here and I was born, what she wanted to do for herself, she passed on to me. So that love of literature was basically, I can say that, drummed into me. I was exposed to literature from an early age. I was very lucky that I went to a very good Greek school, which had a very broad curriculum. So we read some of the great authors at an early age. We were reading Dostoevsky, we were reading Chekhov, we were reading Rabelais even at that school. Yeah. So, and I would say that my mother was the person that taught me how to write. And she would sit me down and say, write a story. And then she would pull it apart, you know, go through the drafting process. This doesn't make sense. You're not following the structure here. I was taught by her, and that became a way of life.
So your mum, I believe, was the first ever a Greek Australian principal in a primary school, and she was a working mum, and your father was working. So the grandparents have had a great influence to you. Now you're a father, and you've got 3 children. And every time I call Costa, he says, "Oh, δεν είναι εδώ, τους έδιωξα να καθαρίσω. Δεν μπορώ να σου μιλήσω τώρα γιατί βάζω τα παιδιά να κοιμηθούν." How do you do all of these things, Konstantine? Because you're not only doing stuff at home, you're a hands-on dad, but what is a day in Konstantinos' diary look like? Can you walk us through? How much do you sleep? You wouldn't sleep very much from what to fit in all of the things. Just to go through, ladies, this week, I saw Konstantinos on Sunday. He was presenting, he was one of the speakers at a new collection of Chris Fifis. Then I see on his Facebook something he did for the church. I think you did. Then you had a radio program. You have a radio program on 3X Way. And tonight you're here. Like 4 events in 1 week. How do you manage all of this? You must have a very supportive wife and a lot of support. How do you do it?
Well, it's school holidays. Otherwise, it's not possible. Yeah. A day in my life is getting up, getting the kids up, making breakfast for the kids, bundling them off to school, going to the office, dealing with all of the disasters and catastrophes and the woeful concatenations of circumstance there. Coming back, making sure the kids are fed, helping the kids to study. I'm teaching the middle child English now because she started school not speaking English. So we're learning how to read, doing all these things, putting them to bed. And then after bedtime, that's when I'm left to my own devices and I can deal with the nefarious foul deeds and purposes of the Greek community. So that's what a day in my life is like. I'm very lucky in the sense that I'm pretty fast at getting things done, and that helps me, but it looks a lot more complicated than what it actually is.
Thank you so much for that. I think I'll stop here about interrogating you about your personal life.
Right, thanks.
but it was very important to get to know you at that personal level, because now we understand the influences that you've had and why you do right, and you are an advocate of all those things, including women. Now, when Konstantinos and I started talking about this event, he praised us when he saw an ad that we had put out about our 20-year celebration, commemoration, but also all the events we're going to do, and link back to the 200 bicentenary. And we were interested in, showcasing unsung heroes, not only professional women, but try to get some of those stories out. And when we started talking, it was like he was going to present some of those unsung heroes and some, some of the women that we know, like Bubulina. But then in the community, just about every other organization started doing stuff around those women. So I thought, well, we are really a little different. We're an organization that likes to know why things happen or do not happen. And we want to delve a little bit why there aren't as many women in the literature. And Kostas, as a historian, we want to understand his take on it. And I'm particularly pleased to say that I love it when men like you and others present those stories, as well as the women from their perspective. There's a different take. So tell us how you view the way history has treated women, and we'll try to understand why that happened.
I'm in a delicate position, and the reason why is because obviously the main problem with the Greek historical narrative, as pertains, for example, to the revolution, is that women's voices are generally not heard. And here I am as a man telling you about women's voices that are generally not heard, and you can see the irony in this. So forgive me, but I'll do my best, because it is a delicate position and it's also an oxymoronic position. And yeah, we did start our conversation this year talking about the fact that at the beginning of the year, no one was canvassing the role of women in the revolution. Then all of a sudden, because of the Me Too movement and all the other social developments in Australia, the Greek members of the Greek community were influenced by that, rightly so. So they tried to include women in the narrative. In my opinion, that hasn't been successful. That hasn't been successful because I think, and it's not their fault, it's just the way that they are enmeshed within the narrative. They aren't able to understand that what they're doing, in my opinion, is merely a tokenistic view of rehashing the same patriarchal narrative over and over again. And I'll give you an example. There was a lady who gave a lecture from Greece about Mandou Mavrogenos, and the first thing she told us was that she was beautiful, she was educated, and she came from a rich family. All of a sudden, alarm bells are ringing in my head. Because Mandou Mavrogenos and Bubulina and women like these, yes, were privileged and entitled, but there are a lot of issues about the narrative. First of all, Mandou Mavrogenos' love life was state property. Yeah, the state had a say in her sexuality and who she was going to love and how she was going to love her. We're talking about Ypsilantis and the fact that they were not allowed to be together. And then she ended up humiliated, having to sue him in the courts for breach of promise. And obviously a patriarchal dominated court with the mores of the time found against her. Now that is a travesty. And yet she's a heroine. Why? Because she gave us money. She bought herself into that position. We don't assess her on her merits. We assess her on what she gave the patriarchy and what the patriarchy got out of her. Similarly, Bubulina. Bubulina married into money twice. Bubulina provided money in order to position her family in a way that she would be part of the ruling class and calling the shots afterwards. And she was deliberately blocked from doing so by the patriarchy, okay? And she was shot because she tried to arrange a marriage for her son with one of the major families in Hydra. So automatically we're getting these women. There's a tacit acceptance of the fact that they exist, but what they actually stand for is being skewed. You look at the Suliotises in Suli fighting. What do we hear about them? Fighting alongside their men and holding their guns as they go to battle. That's not exactly the story, is it?
No, of course not.
No.
And it's the men telling the story.
It's the men telling the story. It's always the men telling the story. There's a historian called Maria Karidakis in Greece who's a feminist historian, and she writes that the Greek Revolution has become in historiography like Mount Athos, a place where women are not allowed to tread. So she's published some books about women that we don't know, and I was astonished to discover a lady called Marigos Zafaropoulou. She was a socialite in Constantinople. She was one of those great people that establish connections wherever they go. She was enmeshed in the Filiki Eteria. She found out from her Ottoman connections that the Ottomans were wise to what was going on in Constantinople about getting the revolution underway. So she tipped them off. She lost her brother as a result. She fled to Greece. She was used as a spy by Kolokotroni in Tripolitsa when they were besieging the town so that she could find out what was going on there. She was also used as a spy in other parts of Greece. She gave a lot of money, Ston Agona, and in the end, she died destitute. And the only reason why we know about this woman, and she's not in any of the major history books, is because this lady, Maria Xiradaki, found in the National Archives a petition she wrote in the 1850s when she was poor and destitute, signed by the sons of the Kapetani who remembered her, listing all of her services to the Greek nation and saying, why can't this woman have a pension? And she wasn't given a pension because she died that year. If it was not for that petition, which is not written by her, but by one of the, I think by Savela's son, we would not know that voice. And it's an important voice. There's a recent book which is being published by Paschalis Kitromilidis called The Dictionary of the Revolution. And there's a chapter on women in that book. And he mentions something which we never discuss. Makrigiannis, who wrote his memoirs, was very famous, wrote it in a form of the Neo-Hellenic dialect that's highly praised, writes about the fact that he had to stop a group of Greek freedom fighters outside of Athens, had to stop them from gang raping a young girl. You know, the narrative is always about how the valiant Greeks are fighting the brutal Turks. How Greek women were treated by their own people is often glossed over. But the historical evidence is there and we don't talk about it. Why? Because we prefer the narrative of the noble Greeks with their manly fustanella fighting against the terrible turban Turk. We also don't discuss the fact that when Tripolitsa fell to Kolokotronis, the women and children, the Muslim women and children were raped and massacred. Yeah. Instead, when we do discuss it because we have to, we find excuses. In my view, there are no excuses. That's just not on.
Very interesting, Konstantinos. And from what I have read, there's other people that have written about it. Some of the women that I saw, they're getting their stories from secondary sources like Philhellenes, artists, folk songs. There are some of the sources that they're looking at to see how the Greek women were portrayed. What's your take on those secondary sources?
Well, a lot of the folk songs were collected by Nikos Politis in the late 19th and early 20th century. So it's a man collecting them and transcribing them. We are not in control of the process, and because there are no recordings, we don't know how he did that, what was the agenda, and even which ones he picked, because all of these things are important. Which ones do you pick? Which ones do you leave out? There's been a study by I think she was an English lady about the songs of money and the songs that women sang when they were on their own to themselves. And they are thoroughly subversive. Yeah. They are thoroughly outside the stereotype. They seek to, they're thoroughly irreverent. They're not what you would expect. There's use of expletives, there's humor, there's sexual innuendo, and these are the hard, if you like, hard-nosed women of money who are supposed to be demure and strong and all these things. We don't get to hear those voices. That lady went there because she was a woman. She was able to gain the confidences of these ladies. They opened up to her and opened up this whole world. It's a world which is also expressed stamirologia. I remember Professor Vrasidas Karidakis lost his mum, I think it was last year or the year before. He went to Greece, he went back to Sochorio. The ladies of the village were preparing his mum for the funeral. They were singing the songs, they were doing these things, following the traditions. I said to him, "Fige, δεν έχεις θέση εδώ πέρα. This is the world of women." And he said that it's amazing that in birth and in death, this is the world of women, and traditionally. And it is a world that we don't know because possibly we haven't up until now valued it enough in order to study it and to give it voice.
So patriarchy, misogyny, men writing the history, what can we learn from it for the future? What is your take? And I'm really pleased to say that you've picked up, you're a male. We're not going to hold that against you. We love you because you really are raising really important issues that poor women discuss in here, you know, every time we have a Zoom meeting or in our discussions. So over to you again.
Well, we have a community here which has been established for a very long time, but the roots of the way we understand our Greek identity go back to that period of time. And we either subconsciously in many cases or consciously replicate some of those antiquated mores and values to the extent where they become synonymous with being Greek, when possibly or probably they shouldn't be. In some cases, those mores are vanishing in Greece, in others not. But here it's a complex negotiation. Manhood is a strange concept, but it's part of the way many people see the Greek identity. I see that even in my work. Without wishing to betray confidences, I had a situation of a mixed family where two people got together, they had kids. One was of another nation, the mother was Greek, she had a son, the husband had a daughter. The son was harassing the daughter. And the situation was the mother would not do anything about it because she felt that her boy was a man and she wouldn't want to do anything to impugn that kid's manhood. This was a lady brought up here, a little bit older than me. I was very disturbed that a mother was replicating that kind of stereotype in this day and age. And unfortunately, I didn't believe it, but mixing with the Greek community, mixing with clients, mixing with other communities, these stereotypes out there are rife and they are dangerous. And when you have a situation where, for example, my wife is afraid to be out at night in the, alone, nipping off to the shops or whatever, that is not the Australia that I grew up in. Even though that's not to say that these things didn't exist even back then, but it's not the Australia I want my kids growing up in, where women do not feel safe and indeed where women are not safe. And that goes back to what I was saying before that you mentioned, where we talk about women's voices that are not being talked about. As a community, when we do afford a space to women, it's usually the successful women. And how do we measure success? In the general estimation, it is women who are either educated, professional, make a lot of money, have power, or generally the clincher is they're well regarded by broader Australia. If Aussies like you and respect you, then you've made it and we have to respect you as well. I find that problematic. What about the ladies in the suburbs who are getting blackmailed by their sons who have a drug habit or are getting hit up for money or subject to psychological, BSE, okay? The ones that are forced to, cajoled, forced, blackmailed into giving their life savings or their properties to their children, in order to, because they feel unsafe. What about women who are still getting verbally, physically abused? What about women who are doing it tough, leave their careers in order to look after loved ones because they're the expectations? Yeah. These are the women whose stories we need to talk about as much or probably more than those women who have made it there through their own merits, okay? But we need to speak about the vulnerable ones as well, the silent majority.
Absolutely. And that was my take and the lens by which I chose the women to be in my book. Put the diversity lens to try and represent the different women and all of those dimensions that you're talking about, the single women that are doing it really tough. And we've got now single baby boomers with not much superannuation or money, living in cars and living in the streets and being abused, and other Greek mothers or fathers that might have worked all their lives and their children abuse them, wanting their periousias. It's just awful what is happening out there, Konstantinos, and you as a lawyer would be seeing these things. Now, you have obviously done a lot of work, and you work in the law, you write a lot, you're part of the community, you organize a lot of stuff. How do you view what is happening at the moment in our community? Most of our organizations are male dominated, very few women on their boards. And the philosophy is the philosophy of the first generation, in inverted commas. I don't want to put down people that haven't had the opportunity to have education, but have been indoctrinated into a patriarchal society, thinking that the roles are separate, women are to do X, Y, and Z, and men are doing this. How do you see the future? What is happening in our community?
I'd like to start off with some background based on my own observations of why I think toxicity has driven many women away. And if you'll permit me, I'm going to use expletives because I'm going to tell this story the way I heard it. I was the lawyer for a particular club, a very vibrant club, a club that about 15 years ago decided we're going to have women at the helm. So there was a woman who was a president of that club, and she's still a driving force of that club, even though she's no longer the president. And this woman then said, I'm going to allow the younger generation of women to come to the fore. So they elected a president who was a young professional woman. She was a teacher, round about my age. At that time, this club was reassessing what to do with their assets. They wanted to sell their clubhouse and buy something else. And there was a lot of pushback by the older male members of the community. So this lady did all of her research. She presented a plan. She had all the financials there. She had an action plan. She presented it in the annual general meeting in a very professional manner. This old man gets up and says, "Τι λες μωρή πουτάνα, κατέβα κάτω να σε γαμίσω."
Oh my God.
I will never forget this because that was the day that the remaining scales fell from my eyes. And I realized two things. One, I cannot respect elder male members of my community without them proving themselves to me that they're decent human beings. And two, and most importantly, I don't want to be in a community where people like that have a say in how we run things. I will never forget, this man is dead now, but this thing has scarred me because I did not believe that such things are possible. And then I went on a train of inquiry, researching other clubs, other things, and I kept on coming across this story again. And I came across it recently with a lady who was appointed president of a club in the western suburbs, and she was constantly undermined. Her confidence was impugned. She left in tears. And she said, I can't, and this was recent. She's an educated, powerful woman in her own right. She was made to feel as if she was nothing by these power brokers who feel that they own the club. Misogyny galore. And my opinion is I don't blame women for not wanting to get involved. There's a club around my area. I've known all the people that have gone there. There are no young people. I asked a lady in her 50s, why don't you go to the club? You grew up there. Surely you have fond memories. And she said, look, I'm a professional woman. I'm at a stage in my life where I'm comfortable with who I am and what I've achieved. I'm not going to go somewhere where some kologyero is going to tell me, "Πήγα να μου φτιάξεις καφέ, μωρή."
Well,
now, these people who do these things are slowly dying out, but unfortunately, you learn by osmosis, and their children and their grandchildren, in many respects, and I see it, unconsciously absorb and replicate those forms of behavior. That being said, the club that I described earlier where that man said those unfortunate and terrible things is still run by a female president, and they're going from strength to strength. It is one of the few clubs in Melbourne which is dominated by the younger generation. And they're working harmoniously and they're working very well. So there is hope for the future. One of our major community organisations, and I won't name them, has appointed women to the board. And one of those women told me recently, I don't want to go on anymore because even though I joined this organisation in order to open up the way for women, I feel that I can't. I feel that I am treated as a token, and all of the women that I speak to don't want to be involved because they don't see how this benefits them and they don't see a place in the organisation for them. And I say this, unless a place for women, I don't want to use the word afforded or is given, but exists by right, we will not have a community for very much longer.
Konstantinos, there's so much change that is happening in the prevailing Australian culture, mainstream culture, and we've had terrible occurrences in the last 3 months. We've had the Australian of the Year who's been through sexual harassment, and then we've had, you know, Brittany Higgins talking about what's happened in Parliament, and we have lost that faith in those big organisations. And the recent rally has brought about some change in government, with the government adopting the report that was shelved for about a year. But we don't know how much of that will be implemented because unless they put money to it, nothing will happen. Now, in the Australian, in organisations, we've got programs like Male Champions of Change, and all the organisations, the ASX organisations and governments have to report on the gender issues. So there is targets and there is quotas. What do you think about that in terms of having some targets in our ethno-specific community organisations? Would something like that be something that you would advocate or we should advocate as an organisation?
I'm not philosophically opposed to quotas if it gives the chance for women who are interested to join existing organisations. My problem, though, is with the organisations as well, per se. I don't think that the current structure of the community, which is comprised of organisations which generally associate people according to their regional background in Greece, are representative anymore. I don't think they work. I don't think that the second and especially not the third generation identify so much with the place of origin with their parents or grandparents came from. I think that people generally identify the areas in which they live. You've got more in common with the Greek living in your suburb than a Greek living back in Epirus or Peloponnesus or wherever. And I think that we need to restructure our community. And I think in that way, you can afford an opportunity for everyone to have equal participation based on the culture as it is lived here, rather than the imagined culture that we've brought with us, which no longer exists in the homeland either. So quotas for existing organisations will only get you so far because those organisations themselves are problematic. Yeah.
So we need to change the culture, and it's all those unconscious biases that the people that are in their brain and mind.
Yeah, for me, it's make or break time. We need to be able to have a conversation, and not only at the elite level, the self-appointed representatives of the Greek community, whoever they may be, okay, Greek community broadly, and there are people who present themselves to the Greek government as being the doyens and the experts as to who we are, and generally most of the vast majority of them, if anyone, are not women. Yeah, the Greek government generally does not deal with women representatives who express an opinion or perspective about Greek Australia. They don't. They deal with 1 or 2 or 3 self-appointed heads who are generally male. Okay, but we need to have a broader conversation about where we're going and where we want to go, and women need to be the driving force of that, in my opinion, because that is where, rightly or wrongly, the hard work in terms of raising children and preparing them to be members of this community is taking place.
It's interesting you're saying that, Konstantinos. It is my view as well, but I think men need to work alongside. We can't change the world because overnight, the women, they have the power at the moment. And while we shouldn't see them as guardians for us, you know, moving forward, without their support, we can't really, we can't move forward. Women are doing so much. And yes, there's a philosophy that says, yes, women can do it all. And I'm saying, yes, women can do it not all, but not all at once without their health being affected.
Well, that's the point. And Coralie Dimitriadis is making some good points. She's watching and she's making some good points. And one of the points that she's making is, yes, it's not enough to support women. We need to make space for women. Okay, we do need, in many cases, to step aside.
Exactly.
So that vacuum of inertia needs to be filled by positive energy and by people who can make a difference. And women are the people who will do that. Okay, that's a very important point, and that needs to happen.
How can we influence, for example, the Greek community? I will bring that up now because we've got a board of 18 people. There's about 5 women in there. Some of those are work for the president. There's 1 or 2, they're really trying very hard to have their voices heard. And Vaso is here. Sorry, Vaso.
Well, can I say something about Vaso?
I don't want to put you on the spot.
I'm going to put Vaso on the spot right now and say this. I've been following the things that Vaso's been doing. And Vaso is one of those people, you know, it's not about PR and whatever. She just goes and gets the job done. And what Vaso is doing quietly behind the scenes to ensure that Greek story time and that part of our Greek culture is being heard and in our municipal libraries all around Melbourne is groundbreaking. She's pioneering a program where every single municipal library where there are Greek populations can have Greek story time. Now, in a multicultural country like Australia is supposed to be, you would expect that that would be something that we should do part of the course and that is our right. It's not happening. She sees the need. She goes out and does it. She doesn't wait for an okay from anyone. She's not hampered by what a man or whoever else or a self-interested person will tell her. She just goes and does it. And yes, she's her father's daughter, and she's learnt from him that activism is a continuous thing. You don't rest on your laurels. You don't take anything for granted, and you don't expect that once you're given the privilege that will remain. You've got to fight for it. That's what she's doing. And people like that really, really show the way.
Winnie, thank you. I just want to second that because I've had the pleasure of working in the background with Vaso over the last couple of days, where she's put together this amazing submission to get funding to do all of that. And unless you really committed and work in the background and prepared to put the hard yard and not being out there, you know, I did this or I did that, and, you know, and representing all Greeks. We've got organizations that are led by women, like Pronya is led by a woman, Agapi Care is led by a woman, and they're the service providers in our community, and yet they don't have the same voice. They're just exhausted. We're all exhausted. We haven't got time to write and to be there advocating. So yes, we need to do more. And I just want to say, Vaso, what can I say? Her father died. Her husband ended up in hospital with a broken arm, and she had relatives telling me a couple of days ago, in and out. And Vaso was working on this submission day in and day out. And Vaso, my hat, you know, I just salute you for doing all that work in the background. But Vaso is doing that, you know, on her own accord. I think she's put it through the councils, not through the community. So
the point is, she's a member of the community.
She's a member of the community.
When I mean community, I mean the broader community, not an organisation. She's a member of that thing which we call the Greek community, which is us identifying and associating with each other based on our common origin. Okay, she's a member of that. She spies a need. She sees ότι υπάρχει ένα έλλειμμα, ότι there's something that's missing, and she doesn't wait for anyone.
She just goes and does it. And it's just wonderful. So bravo, Vaso. You've got our, really, we want more people like you to be, and do put these submissions.
And can I say, Vaso is a professional person. She works. She's bringing up two kids, two wonderful kids. She's a mother, yeah, and she's also doing this. She's amazing. She really is I'm trying to think of the English word, because after a certain time, my mind goes back to Greek. I want to say protipo paradigma pros mimisin. Well, she's a role model. She's a hero for me.
Absolutely. And what else is remarkable about Vaso, Vaso, you deserve all of this, okay, is that she's raising, her mum was not Greek. Her dad was George Zangalis. You would all know him. I've posted in the group, and many of you would have met him because he was an activist. He was one of my role models. Now, Vaso grew up in a mixed family and went to a bilingual program in the Richmond school. So I was very much involved at the time, and we had those books that you talked about, Konstantinos, back then, and the curriculum. Now, Vaso is also married to a non-Greek, and she's raising her kids. Her kids speak Greek. I used to take my granddaughter last year before COVID to one of the libraries in Richmond where they had the storytelling, and I could see her husband, who's not Greek, or her mum, who's not Greek, taking the kids to the library storytelling. So that is remarkable. And I want to come back to that and talk a little bit about our language and culture and where we're heading.
Okay, before we get there, I take my kids to the Saturday Greek School of the Greek community, like Vaso does. And every Saturday when I go there, I see board member Tammy Liu's husband, who's also non-Greek, taking his kids to the Greek school.
That's wonderful.
And whenever he sees me, greets me in Greek, and we have a rudimentary Greek conversation. It is possible to train your males in this way.
Absolutely. And I am of the opinion, and I've always, there's two schools of thought. Women can do it all on their own, or women need to be working as partners with the men. I'm of that philosophy, and that's why I've always, from the outset, when I set up this network, we welcome men. There've always been men that have come along to our events. Now, when I look at my generation, which is really, I'm a baby boomer and in my 60s, a lot of my friends, my male friends, they all share the house duties. I couldn't do this if my husband didn't help me. I couldn't do any of this if he didn't shop, if he didn't cook, if he didn't clean. And in my immediate circle, all the males share the household. So not all males are terrible and they're sexist and they are misogynist. There's a lot of people do.
Oh, look, you can still do the housework and be a real asshole and be misogynist as well.
Yeah, absolutely. But what I'm saying is that helps, if it's shared. If a woman has to do everything, right, be a professional woman, raise the kids, go shopping, cooking, cleaning, it's just so much. It is so difficult because, sooner or later you can do all of that for a while, but your health will suffer. So there are lots of really good comments and questions here, Konstantinos. And I think I might just stop here and open up the conversation. Thank you so much. We'll come back. So, Melina, I think you had the first question. Do you want to ask it or comment?
Hi, Costa. Thank you so much for such an insightful talk. So I'll just read out my question. How do you see the Greek Australian male evolving as the generations progress in the diaspora, generally speaking?
It's a hard question to answer because how do you define the Greek Australian male? There are so many variations and permutations. there are people of different socioeconomic backgrounds, of different educational backgrounds. There are different subcultures within the Greek community, and all of them are different. And we're reflecting as we go along. When you're talking about evolution, I talk about devolution, because in this day and age, there is no longer any consensus, even in the broader Australian polity, about what our common values and aspirations are. We're seeing that breaking down in the broader sense, and we're also seeing that breaking down within the Greek community as well. One thing that I notice, and that's empirically based on my experience, is that a lot of people are replicating misogynistic behavior. To what extent that refers to their Greek culture, and to what extent that refers to their exposure to broader Australian culture, movies, media, is something that I think needs to be studied. Because I think as we get settled here longer, we are more Greek in name and in a few cultural ceremonies, the way that Cavafy described in his poem Posidonians, where we pull out a few token Greek things to say that we're Greek, and that's just a name. But a lot of the attitudes that we preserve and pass on are basically coming through the mainstream. So, and we don't have that communication, most of us anymore, with Greece, so that can be one of the prime informers of the way we understand our manhood and the way that we behave. So it is a complex question. It depends on the family, it depends on upbringing, it depends on who you associate with. But I am concerned about what I'm seeing in many respects. And I'm also concerned about a reaction towards what is considered to be greater female dominance. And many men see this. Many men are complaining about being disempowered. And I don't share that point of view. And I think that point of view is worrisome, because it creates resentment and it leads to behavior which we need to worry about.
Interesting. Thank you. A very interesting question, and variation, of course. Different identities, different upbringing, different. Absolutely. Coralie, are you there? Did you want to ask a question or make a comment? Where is she? Hi.
Hi, I'm in my pajamas. God, well, I can't even see myself. Hang on. Yeah, I really liked your talk. I thought it was really good. I don't know, as a kind of activist in trying to empower women and trying to get women's voices into literature and the arts, and trying to shift, because my extended family and people that I know, they're so traditional, and I don't know, sometimes I just think, how do we shift it? Like, you've got all these really great ideas and you've made these really great points, but how do we put it into action? That's a thing that I think about all the time. Like, how do you shift this stuff when, like, for example, when I try and challenge cultural leaders in the community about what's happening, I usually get very kind of like like brick walls, from men and women, and there's this kind of like real resistance, like, to shift it, because it's almost that they think you're trying to shift their Greekness, because this is how Greeks are. Like, it's really it's a challenge. So yeah, I don't know if you've got any points on any kind of practical things that you feel need to be done, or how they can be done to, like, make things, to shift things a bit more.
Yeah, I do. And one of those is to look at your experience and the way I learnt from you. Because yes, you're trying to challenge these people, but these people are not particularly relevant, are they? These people belong to antiquated organizations which really don't represent people anymore. But look at what you're doing. You come, as you say, from a traditional family, and your poems are about dealing with that, negotiating that, and carving your own way. Okay. And you're informing people, and you're opening up windows for people to see. Now, as I discussed with Varvara, that's not my world. I didn't grow up in that world. But reading your poetry and understanding your struggle has made me understand a lot of things and made me aware of the world that I didn't know existed, because I didn't live it. So you are being the leader. They're not the leaders. You are the leader. because you're taking something which didn't exist and giving a voice to it and making us all sit up and pay attention. And my point is this: you don't need their permission. You don't need their sanction. You've got something to say, you go and say it. You've done it on your own. And we're all there listening and understanding. So that is, I think, the blueprint for the future. It's just like Vassal. Vassal sees a need, she goes and does it. She doesn't ask. There will be people who won't appreciate it. There will be people that will not be challenged, will be challenged by it. There will be people that disagree, but that's not the point. The point is you've got something to say. It's your own unique experience and you are saying it whether people like it or not. That's the important thing. I remember we had a discussion, it was a few months ago, about Greek women in the revolution. And I asked your opinion about what you felt about that and how we can discuss it. And you came up with your own event with a number of other very important female artists discussing that. You did that on your own.
Yeah, thank you so much for the compliment. I guess
it's not a compliment, it's an observation based on what you're doing. I don't think you realize how important you are and what a leadership position you have.
That's really sweet. Thank you. I guess I'm more on Varvara's point about the exhaustion though. And I don't think people realize like how exhausting it is and what kind of toll it takes on one's body to continue the fight. I mean, how do we support women? You know, what strategies can we put in place to make it easier for them so they can keep doing what they're doing, but also bring more women into that space? Because, you know, like I've only got one body, you know, and I, you know, I've got health issues and, you know, and Varvara can probably relate to this as well. So how do we like, you know, protect these voices and these women that are doing these things without wearing them out? I guess that's more what I was asking. Yeah, maybe.
Well, look, Food for Thought is an organisation of people that can offer mutual support, and that's how it was found. And what Varvara's doing is amazing. And if you take that model and extrapolate it, there are ways and means. But I would say this: most of the time, the males who take women for granted are not aware of the exhaustion and of the limits and of the inability to go on and of the burdens placed upon women. And you need to make men aware. And you need to demand that support, that assistance. That is very important. I know the toll that it takes. I live it. My wife's father is dying. She has to deal with that. She has to deal with her work. And her health is being compromised. She's not coping. So that's where I have to step in. And I do. That's important. You can't make it on your own. Yeah. I've seen it with my mum growing up. My mum was suffering from Menias disease. She was applying for supplementary grants to try and get money into the primary school for refugee kids back in the day, bringing me up, fulfilling the role of a housewife and running around. If it wasn't for my dad, who was very supportive, that wouldn't have happened. And I remember waking up and seeing my mum crawling on the floor to get to the kitchen, and I'll never forget it. And I also remember one thing that my great-grandmother told her, which was when you get up in the morning, whether you're crawling, whether you're walking, whether you're staggering, you need to get the job done in any way possible.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much, Costa and Coralie. And I just want to do to that, Coralie, you are a voice, you're an alternative voice, and you are voicing it. And it comes from your really not such good experiences that you've had with very traditional parents. Not all parents are like that, and you're not going to change some of those people. So you need to be mindful that what you do, as Costa said, will not appeal to everyone, but it will appeal to some others, and keep doing it. And I think you've had a lot of support from the network and all of us, and it's been wonderful to see the festivals that you've organized with all those artists from all around the world. It's been amazing. So well done.
Thank you. Thanks.
Okay, let's go next. Who is next? Who wants to? Irini, are you there? Where's Irini? Okay, no. He would like. Okay. I'm just trying to see. Aliyah is gone. Aliyah joined from Brussels. She had to go. Irini is in Greece. Are you still there, Irini? No, she must have gone. But she made a point before about our role as mothers. And, you know, the whole thing is about working together. We influence. And if we are brought up with those sexist and patronizing attitudes, we as mothers have to watch our narrative as well, what we say or don't say, and how we treat the boys or the girls. And we need to be very, very mindful of those behaviors. I want to give Konstantinos' mum, where are you, Eleni? The opportunity to say hello.
Before we do that, can I just say something about how power is negotiated within our community?
Okay.
When we were discussing what we were going to talk about, because originally it was just going to be about women in the revolution, you said, no, I want to talk about you, I want to talk about your background. And I said, Varvara, I'm not very comfortable with talking about my background and my personal life because it's just the way I am. And you came back with this, you said, I've already spoken to your mum about it and she's cleared it, so it's okay. So that's how power is negotiated and is disseminated within our community informally. Okay, there you go. Sanctioned by mum.
So the reason I've done that, can you see now how our upbringing, how the way we're growing up, the kind of household, our primary socialization, our education, our religion, all of that play a big role in, and they shape the person that you are. But then that worldview that you have formed through your mum and your school and your community informs you of what you choose to talk about, who your friends are, and how you view the world. So I hope you're happy that we've taken this tack tonight, Costa.
Well, look, the point is that I think that in my situation and the kind of upbringing that I have, it has been a partnership between my parents and me, and it's my mother's interests became my interests, and she's my main interlocutor. She's the person that I discuss my writings and my opinions with more than anyone else. It's that kind of dialectic.
And she's just a wonderful woman. Eleni, να χαίρεσαι το γιο σου. We're just so proud.
Ευχαριστώ, Βαρβάρα μου, να είσαι καλά, να χαίρεσαι και εσύ τα παιδιά σου.
Okay, now we just want you to make a comment or say something, contribute to the discussion. What was Costas like as a little kid?
Oh, here we go.
Costa as a little kid was a pain in the neck. He was a very difficult child.
Yes.
A very difficult infant, but a very good child later on. The reason why he got interested in poetry and all that, because that's all I did to him. I read to him and I told him stories, and I continually tell him stories now.
That's fantastic. And I see you and Costa go everywhere together. And do they say η μαμά του Costa, or how do people treat you, greet you?
Για την ώρα είμαι η μαμά του Κώστα. Αυτό με κάνει περήφανη, όχι γιατί είμαι η μαμά του Κώστα, γιατί ο Κώστας δεν τρέπεται να έχει δίπλα τη μαμά του.
That's wonderful. That's wonderful. That's great. Matt, are you there, Matt? You had sent a question, I think. Matthew, hi.
Welcome. Hi, hello.
Hi, do you want to make a comment?
Yes, actually I would.
About our community, you and I have had quite a lot of conversations.
Yeah. Look, I didn't have a lot to do with the Greek community up until about 5 years ago when I started my my dementia-specific research. And Costa, congratulations! I thought it was a very informative talk. I think some of the things that I'd like to bring to people's attention, and I think Kiralee brought them up before, and your response was, you know, if you're having issues with these people, ignore them, you know, just go on and do your own thing. And I think that's all good and well, but unfortunately within the Greek community, space isn't given to women to really participate and have their voices heard. And we see this at the highest level, you know, within the Greek community here. And you were talking about how, you know, the Greek government only deals with, you know, a few specific individuals and they tend to be males. And I certainly know that that's the case. I've seen that quite a lot over the past few years. So I think it's going to be about tearing down the old guard and storming the Bastille. And I think that that's a a very interesting way for women to move forward. And, you know, I think for me personally, I credit who I am today to the influence of very strong women. My mother, my cousin, a lot of other positive female influences. And the only reason that I've managed to get my research off the ground and able to contribute to the Greek community in such a way is because of the Greek women that have really supported me here. A lot of the support hasn't come from Greek males, interestingly, and there isn't a lot of space that's made for them. And I think that the language that's used to describe women more broadly speaking, you know, it's very antiquated. You know, the second a woman, you know, might, you know, express some sort of discord about the way that she's been, you know, mistreated or overlooked or anything there, you know, instantly the language that's used seems to be quite derogatory. It's, you know, it's hysterical, it's emotional, you know, yet if a male decides to, you know, go down that path, he's almost commended for being brave and not necessarily, you know, taking on this, you know, this.
We've lost you,
this emotive, you know, response. And, you know, I think, how do you know? Oh, sorry. Yeah, so, you know, how do we change this as a community, you know, looking at, oh, sorry, how's that?
Yeah,
now we can hear.
Am I back?
Yeah.
How do we move forward as a community and make, you know, females more inclusive and a more relevant voice in today's community? And, you know, in 2021, we don't have that inclusivity within Greek females in a lot of positions, and a lot of what is being offered to them is tokenistic at best, regardless of, you know, the way that people try to put a spin on things. You know, it doesn't happen, it's not there. And, you know, in my opinion, you know, female voices, you know, are certainly, you know, they offer a much more different perspective. You know, quotas aside, all that stuff, it's just not there. It hasn't happened. And I read a recent article that my cousin actually pointed out to me in some of the Murdoch media, you know, rags, and it was, you know, sexism doesn't exist, gender inequality doesn't exist, pay gaps don't exist. They certainly do. So how do we move forward? How do we correct these issues? And we have seen an overcorrection, you know, in a lot of these social issues, but they're needed. You know, pendulums need to swing one way really, really hard in order for these voices to be heard. And then perhaps a reset can happen. You know, whether or not that's the case, you know, that remains to be determined. But the systematic, you know, demonization of women that has occurred for, you know, several, you know, hundreds of years now, it hasn't stopped. So what do we need to do in order to, you know, make this a relevant topic and a topic that ends up, you know, correcting itself, and equality, you know, is, you know, eventually made, you know, part of this dialogue? How do we get there?
Absolutely. Thanks, Matthew. I just want to bring in the conversation the role of the media and social media now in our narratives and about influencing. And, you know, there are people here that are doing research, like Melina is doing research with the people that have come from Greece and how their identity is informed. So I know it's a bit premature to put you into the spot, Melina, but we've got somebody else here. Gregory, you are an editor of a magazine, am I right? Is that magazine coming out? Are you there? How do you see your role in presenting diverse voices and the voices of women? Do you have any women on your staff? When I speak to Sotiris Katzimanolis and Neos Cosmos, he says to me, all of my staff are women. What are you talking about? Of course, the most of the, and you know, we have seen some very good stuff recently, more women, but there's always more men representing, you know, the issues rather than women. So I'll just open it up for discussion.
Just on that point, sorry, Varvara, if I can intervene, you will remember, though, that it was the women journalists like Penny Pappas and Evgenia Pavlopoulou who are the recipients of the awards, journalistic awards, the mainstream journalistic awards, because they're appreciated. You'll also remember people like Vivian Morris, who really paved the way as a woman journalist back in the day when that wasn't the thing to do, in the late 70s, early 80s, and who really tackled some of the most important social issues in our community. So there are trailblazers out there.
Absolutely. We need more. And social media today, the young people do not read newspapers. they're influenced by the social groups, and Instagram is on the go. And
well, can I say on that, because I follow social media very much. You have a look at the some of the postings which exist on Neos Cosmos website or on other websites, and especially about matters to do with women. And I am actually quite taken aback at the misogyny, not only from men, but also from women. Women who regurgitate the patriarchal role, assume it, and look down on other women who question it. And again, those women use that as an identifier of being Greek. They impugn the Greekness, in inverted commas, of women who question the patriarchy. And it's a really interesting and disturbing social phenomenon.
it is, and it's quite disturbing. I watch that too. And also women take down other women. We've got the tall poppy syndrome. There's so much trolling happening to successful women. And we know that from, mainstream journalists. Our own Vaso, who is our patron, she's been, a victim of that, and many other women that I know. So who would like to make a comment or ask a question?
If I could go back to something that
Yes.
Matt said before, because I thought it was very important. And just to clarify, what I was referring to, I wasn't necessarily saying that we should ignore those who stand in women's ways. What I was more trying to make the point is that these organizations that purport to represent the Greek community and which appear to also exclude women are not as important or as powerful as they appear to be, and they are fastly becoming irrelevant. And that is why I believe now is the time for women to be able to bypass them and do what they want. I think people get somewhere and achieve things when there are actions rather than words. And increasingly, these organizations, and yes, Coralie is right, they may be asset rich, but then again, it is activism and willpower that gets things done, and not necessarily money and inertia. I don't think they have as much power as they purport to. And I think that people that want to get things done and have the will to get things done will create momentum if they're working in concert with like-minded people. Yes, those organizations do exist. Yes, they try to be self-perpetuating, but their representative base is getting smaller and smaller because the conditions upon which they are founded no longer exist anymore.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Costa. I'll hand over to Konstantinos. Please unmute. Hi.
Yeah, look, I just wanted to add my voice to everybody else's and just say I really applaud you, Varvara, for organising this. I really do. And Costa, it was such a pleasure hearing you speak. It really was within this context. You know where my passions lie. I'm very interested in the voices of women writers. I think it's quite extraordinary as to the things encapsulated within their writings. I also loved your last comment. I really did. And it's something that it was actually related to a question I wanted to ask, but you answered it, which is not unusual for you before I asked it. And that is that I perceive that myself. These, overblown peacocks running around the Greek community are really kind of walking on sand at the moment, really. They're not as powerful as perhaps the community thinks they are, or the wider community. The other thing too, Costa, you'd be very, very aware of this, that it's these images that get into the Greek media all the time. And so we perceive them because we see them all the time in Neos Cosmos represented. So we perceive them as somehow having greater power. I really applaud Coralie Dimitriadis, who actually wrote a specific thing that happened to her, where she approached the Neos Cosmos to write an opinion piece and was told no. And I really do believe it's time for us to create our own narrative. I really do. And I applaud you for saying it. So just thank you.
Thank you very much, Konstantina. On that, I think we need to be very careful. I don't want to speak against Neos Cosmos or any other newspaper because they have supported, from what I know, there's never been a case where I have written something and sent it that they didn't publish. My understanding is that a lot of the people that write for Neos Cosmos, who are majority men, don't get paid. There are very few people, and from also my discussions with people that work at Neos Cosmos, and it's bad that nobody from Neos Cosmos is here, that we're talking about them, is that they really, at the moment, because of COVID and because of many issues, they don't have the money to pay. People are not buying newspapers. They don't put as many ads in there, even about the funerals. People now go on social media. So it's very difficult. The other thing that I know, the majority that buy Neos Cosmos are that first generation people, and some of our progressive views may not go down well with their readership. So they have to consider their cohort as well. So if we're asking, you know, to my experience, they've never. But if you write an opinion piece, of course you need to get paid because that takes a lot of time. They may not have the money.
Can I say this based on that point? Neos Cosmos is not the only media institution out there dealing with the Greek community. There are others. There is radio. There are different forms of radio. I think in the radio, women are much more represented. In 3XY, you've got Emilia Kazakou. You've got Get Yield You on 3ZZZ. You've had other people in 3ZZZ as well, women presenting programs for a very long time. And of course, who is the greatest media personality of our Greek community? Arena Frangoudaki, the goddess of Greek media, a person who is revered and loved and who had her own very difficult struggle as a single mother and everything else that happened, and really struggling to find a path and acceptance, and she did it. So reality is complex. Yes, there are great obstacles, but yes, there are also role models who carve a unique path for themselves, and it is in their footsteps that people can follow, or at least draw inspiration in order to not only follow suit, but also find ways to express what they need to express within that context, or even, as Matt said, change the whole context as well. You bypass the conventional, you bypass the stereotype, and you make your own reality. And when you're doing that and you're creating your own momentum, people will follow.
So Kostas and Matthew and Gregory, the men who aren't in the group that we've set up during COVID, we, through this private forum that we've set up, which I call Social Learning Forum, we portray, put up all stories about inspirational women, all stuff to do with the different voices, and people have the opportunity to be inspired, but also comment and learn. So before I close, is there anybody else? I want to play a little video, just 1 minute, and then ask a question to Costa. All right, maybe I'll ask you a question and then I don't want you to answer until I play this video. Is that okay? Okay. Are you a feminist, Costa?
So important that we all understand that it's not only that men can be feminists, it's that men should be feminists as well. And I am proud of that. Being a feminist for me means recognizing that men and women should be, can be, must be equal. And secondly, that we still have an awful lot of work to do. He for She is a UN movement that I hope all of you go up and sign up for, of men standing up for women, men shutting down some of those negative conversations that we get in locker rooms, in bro culture. We need to know that we are better than that. How we treat our sisters, our girlfriends, our cousins, our mothers, and the world around us matters. We need to take back what it is to be a man, and that means being open, compassionate, respectful, and brave about standing up for it.
Wow.
NBC News viewers, thanks for checking out our YouTube channel. Subscribe by clicking on that button down here and click on any of the videos over here to.
Okay. So I'm to answer the question, am I a feminist?
The reason I'm saying this, when I talk about feminism and they say those feminists, the word feminism has really so misinterpreted.
Well, I've got problems with Trudeau's definition, even though I respect and I acknowledge its well-meaning. What I see from Trudeau is me being the leader of a country, the male leader of a country, telling men, we need to do this to women, we need to do that for women. And it's, again, the patriarchy defining what to do for women instead of the other way around. I believe that the first step is that men need to listen to women. And listening doesn't mean allowing them to speak. It means considering and understanding what they have to say and appreciating what they have to say. That is the first step. When you acknowledge as a man that what a woman has to say is important and you need to afford the space to do it, then things start changing. Unfortunately, in many cases, that doesn't happen. And it's not about only what men must do. It is about what women need these men to do. Okay? That is where the mutual appreciation and listening comes from. It's not us defining how women will be emancipated, because then there is no emancipation. It is respecting the emancipation that comes from women for women.
That's an excellent answer, Costa. Thank you so much.
And I think that Coralie wanted to say something.
Okay, Coralie, where is Coralie?
Hi. Just on, I want to give an example of what's happening in diversity in Australian media. That's like a Facebook group that's advocating for diversity in the Australian media. And they've teamed up with Arts Hub and fundraised a bunch of money to get diverse writers' articles published on Arts Hub. So they give Arts Hub the money, and then Arts Hub commissions articles by diverse writers. So I know Nels Cosmos are budget strapped, and I have approached Nels Cosmos to ask them if they'd like to apply for a grant to get money to publish specifically women's opinion articles. And they said no. But I think something like that needs to happen, where it's like, there is money in the Greek community. You know, can we give some of that money to Nels Cosmos to publish X amount of articles by women? You know, because women need to be paid to do what they do, to do the work. So I think that we need active, active things. We need to do things that are putting women's voices on a major platform. And I think that, like, everyone reads Nels Cosmos online, from all the generations of Greeks, even outside of, even people that aren't Greek read Nels Cosmos online. So the English section, I mean. So I think that's an example of how money can shift power on a larger scale, because everyone reads Nels Cosmos. Everyone does. So that's all I wanted to say.
I would have to agree with you. And I would say this, unfortunately, in the current structure of the Greek community, comprised of suburban brotherhoods with their buildings, which are all falling apart, which are generally empty because they can't find people to turn up to functions anymore. Okay, the emphasis is on bricks and mortar. We raise money in order to pay the mortgage for the building, and then we raise money to maintain the building that no one ends up coming to. And then we have fights over who's going to sell the building and how we're going to divide the assets. And hardly any money is applied to the necessary things which will perpetuate our community, which are arts and education. Okay, that is unfortunate. And our community as it currently stands and its institutions, except for notable exceptions, one being the Greek community of Melbourne, which spends a large part of its budgets for cultural activities. And even then, it's difficult for them. But most of the others don't, and most of the others don't appreciate it. And that's not going to change until that generation passes and people take over the reins as much as possible, who are able to understand the importance of investing in these things and creating a vibrant culture. I would say this, generally, Coralie, when people don't know how to go about something, and grants is a daunting thing for a lot of people, they tend to reject it because they don't know how to do it, but we can work with people and show them how to do these things so that the things that you want to do can get done. And I can speak to you later about that and who to approach and how to do it in relation to that specific comment. But what I'm heartened at in terms of the English section of Neos Cosmos is that every week the opinions are sought about from people, younger people, about the future of the Greek community and how they see themselves fitting in. The vast majority of the people that offer these opinions and the vast majority of the people that Neos Cosmos asks are young women of the second and third generation emerging and finding their way. A lot of them, like Olympia Nelson, who's a very erudite, very educated, very progressive researcher, are groundbreaking opinions. They challenge the status quo. And I was reading Neos Cosmos only a week ago where she was talking about the fact in relation to 1821 that we shouldn't be glorifying the violence and the armed conflict and the martial aspects, and that we reject that. And it's the creation of identity and all the problems associated with that that needs to be formed part of a critical discussion. This is a girl whose father, I understand, is of Australian background, who lost her mother. She was a renowned photographer, who is currently researching in the field of Byzantine studies, and who is creating a discourse all of her own. And she's a voice to that we will be listening to greatly in the future. The people are out there. How do we get them together? Forums like this facilitate it. People who understand and appreciate what we are trying to do as a whole to empower women and to give them, not give them, but afford them the space that they're due is important. And I think that the more voices that join this conversation, the stronger this movement will be. But it is a necessary movement.
Costa, can I just weigh in and say, Olympia Nelson's a very close friend of mine. She's like a little sister, and she literally lives down the road from me. So she'll be very, very happy that that you've spoken so highly of her, and I can't wait to pass this information on to her. And you're absolutely right. Olympia's very progressive. She is, she marches the beat of her own drummer, and in fact, I think she's somebody that makes her own drums. But she is a complete and utter breath of fresh air, and that's certainly a reflection of her mother Polly, and then also her father as well. The influence that they've had on not just her, but also her brother Solomon as well. They're just amazing kids, and they're the voices that need to be heard. They're the ones that need to be paving the way forward and creating a platform for people like Kiralee, to have that voice, to explore something else, to carve out something new. And Kiralee, just so you know, I'm a member of AHEPA, and if you wanted to come along and have a chat to us about potentially sourcing some funding for you in order to get something off the ground, I think they'd be more than happy to assist with that. They are predominantly older, and once I met with them, I think it was about 3 months ago, surprisingly all very, very progressive in the way that they think about stuff. So I think you'd be, a breath of fresh air and very welcome to come along to one of those meetings and discuss some of these issues.
That's wonderful. What I want to take away from tonight is we need to continue the conversation, but more the action. We need more hands-on people like Vaso and others that are working behind the scenes and actually get things done. And all of us here, we're all educated, we can write articles and have our voices heard. But I'm even finding that women don't even respond to what we do. I haven't had very many women, and this is like parapono. I don't want to end like that. People are exhausted. They don't even give feedback. They don't, very few will respond and say, hey, well done. That was really well done. Or can we have more of this? Or even writing and publicizing what we're doing here. I've never seen a woman taking all of this wonderful stuff for 20 years that we've been doing through Food for Thought outside. I've had Costa Kalymnios praising Food for Thought on many occasions, but I've never seen a woman who's been part of this and has benefited to actually write something in the external world and say, hey, we've got this Greek Australian Women's Network that has been doing this stuff, working really hard behind the scenes, and I haven't seen that. So hopefully from tonight, let's take some lessons and say, well, some of us can do more. I certainly have reached my limits, 20 years, and hoping that, you know, the younger generation, the 30-year-olds who are amazing, I've got children in that age bracket.
Varvara, you haven't reached your limit. You're just starting your limit.
I don't know. Thank you very much. Alex is one of my committed committee members that has been there for 12, 13 years, and she's one of those quiet achievers as well, working in the background.
I feel you're only just starting, really. I've been there. I've been around for 13 years. I've known you for 50 years, and you're only just starting.
Thank you so much. Before I close, I just want to get Georgia to do,
okay.
If I can get everybody to clap, and really, I've thoroughly enjoyed tonight's discussion. We've just touched the surface. There's so many other dimensions that we haven't done. So can I get everybody to unmute and clap?
Unmute first.
Unmute.
Unmute yourself, guys.
Okay.
And can we have a photograph of those that have stayed, just for our records? Alexa, can someone take a photo?
And happy birthday to Georgia.
Okay.
Georgia, I'll hand over to Georgia.
I would like to thank Costa Kalymnios, first of all, and Varvara, you again, once again, for a wonderful opportunity to have the two of you discuss this, and really all participants, Coralie and Vaso and everybody who actually participated. It's been such an informative, insightful conversation. And thank you for the challenges you put forward, the support you provided, Costa, of women, and the encouraging words, because there are a lot of voices out there who need a bit of encouragement to come forward and to do their bit, their little bit of action to bring us all forward as a community. Because there are young people, and I do have young people myself that I'm trying to engage in the Greek community, but that is part of the difficulty. How do some of those younger people engage in the Greek community? So I want to congratulate those who are engaged, like Coralie and Melina and all these other younger people. And we need to work together to bring male and female voices together to bring us all forward, because it's certainly worth our while. So Varvara, thank you once again for bringing us together. And I agree with Alex, this is not the end. I know that you're tired, but you need to keep the rest of us engaged until, and for us to move forward as a group together with our male support friends. So I just also wanted to say that we won't have, our next event is going to be in June. Our main event for this year would be later in the year, when we will launch the book that Varvara has compiled of Greek women voices, so that they can be heard and published. And yeah, we're going to get there. So we're going to work hard to make this happen. And we want everybody's support and encouragement with funding, with publicity, the whole work. So you'll hear more through the webpage, through the Facebook group. And thank you so much, everybody. It's been a good birthday for me being part of this discussion tonight. So thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Georgia. Thanks, Maria, for the introduction, and all my committee members, Melina, Alex, who else is there? Who have I met? Maria Marcoussis, Maria Macris, and everyone. And to those that joined for the first time, Gregory, we didn't see your face. I hope you heard what we're saying and spread the word through your magazine. So thank you again. Kalynista. Matthew.
Kalynista.